Hi, my name is Thomas Müller-Martin, the Global Partner Technical Lead at Omada, and today we are going to dive into the world of identity governance and administration, one of the fastest growing areas in modern cybersecurity strategies of many organizations. As a named leader in this field, Omada provides a user-friendly solution that not only reduces your risk and the impact of getting hacked, it as well empowers you to react quickly to changing demands around managing your employees' access, such as the transitioning to home office, and makes sure that your access control is compliant, effective, and reliable. Today, I'm going to demo only some of the benefits identity governance brings to your business, enhancing the productivity of your staff while keeping your risks under control. So we're looking now at a demo environment of Omada Identity. Robert Wolf is a typical manager in our test organization, and when he comes to his start screen, he sees his task in the upper part of the screen, and in the lower part he has the services that he can just jump into, and he can have additional services where he has access to in the services menu. Those services that are now seen here are built in, so they come directly out of the box immediately after installing. Robert Wolf has as well a list of typical entities he would like to look at. For example, the core of identity management, the list of identities he manages. Robert Wolf is the manager of 38 individuals, and he can look at Karen Henderson and see that Karen Henderson has some identity details, and those identity details are mainly the things that we import from the authoritative source, like the HR system. And related to this import, we have some assignments, access that we provision and automate in the target systems. Based on her profile, Karen Henderson has received an Active Directory user, as well as several security group assignments. We can see as well that she has several other accounts and access in our IT infrastructure. Some of the access is explicitly approved, which means that she requested something which was then individually approved by the responsible approver. And we can see that a lot of her access is implicitly approved, which means that there's a rule that decides based on her profile, based on her location, organizational unit relation, based on her employments, or even based on a project assignments that she should get the access, like then a project, SharePoint site, etc. But we don't just provide you with the information about the details per identity. If you look at the solution as an administrator, we provide you a comprehensive overview about the access to your systems on the system level. As a system owner in Omada Identity, you have access to the Compliance Workbench. And the Compliance Workbench is a comprehensive administration cockpit in Omada Identity that allows you to get the information about which identities have which account in your systems. So we can see, for example, in Active Directory that most of the accounts are provided implicitly, which means via a policy, that we have done some requests and approvals, and that there are some not approved access, which means that those assignments do not have any reason that we can identify in the identity governance solution. There might be as well orphan accounts or orphan assignments that we cannot relate to any identity. So there is the difference between an account, where you have an account and a password, and the identity, which is something like your personal data record in the HR system. From here we can dive into the details. So if we want to see which are the 27 items that we see in Active Directory that don't have a reason in our database, we can see that they are related to, for example, Susan Porter or Robert Scott with a bunch of security groups. Of course, we can jump into the details of the account, the identity, or the resource, so that we get the details about this. And if we want to clean this up, so if we say that now is the time where we want to delete all those not approved items. We do not necessarily have to go into the system and delete them. We do not have to enforce that via Omada identity, but instead of that, we are able to grant a post approval, like to say you did not request your access in the compliant way, so please let us know now that you take the responsibility for the access to be created. And by giving this to the manager or the resource owner, we allow that this access remains instead of deleting it in the target system. So for example, we can do an access review for a manager. And we select the not approved items to be recertified. Before we kick off this recertification, we receive an initiation screen that allows us to further narrow down the scope of our recertification. So we can say that we just want to involve parts of our organization to few organizational units or a subtree. Eventually we want just to recertify high risk accounts or high risk access that grants the ability to look into personal data records in the target systems. But when we are satisfied with our selection, we click on generate survey data, where we then get a preview of who is going to get which questions, and we can of course look into the details. So we can see Robert Wolf would get these 6 questions to reply to. When we then launch the survey tasks, an email is sent to the recipients so that they get their task with a deep link directly into their mailbox. And of course, alternatively, they get the task on the start page. So Robert Wolf now has an access review task, and he can see that these are the 6 elements that he has to take a decision on. And eventually you can click on this checkbox to make a selection for all the items to keep, or if he likes to do an individual decision, he can of course do that in each line. And after taking the decisions, we're going to see that the access for Patrick Dorgan will be immediately removed, while the access for the other people will remain and is transitioned from not approved to explicitly approved, as we now have a direct decision of an individual that is responsible for this. These reconciliation tasks allow us to remediate the differences between the actual and the desired state in our databases, clean up the access that is not desired, and keep your system under control so that we can enforce the need-to-know principle at any time. These kind of recertifications can be initiated ad hoc, individually, or scheduled via a timer, like once per month or all 3 months. And by that you have an automatism that keeps your systems clean and that makes sure that no undesired access is provisioned down. But how do we do that? How is the connectivity into the target systems configured? To import the information from the target systems and export and provision down to them, you find the Setup menu. Under the Master Data area, you find the Systems view. This view gives you an overview about the systems that are connected to Omada Identity. Omada provides a modular connectivity framework with a lot of best practice implementations. A long connectivity list does not help you if your application is not included. And even more, the integration of some version of the application for a narrow use case might be misleading. So it's better to focus on these modular connectivities instead of providing long lists with applications that you have never seen for 10 years. For example, we have an integration with ServiceNow. ServiceNow is a very common IT service management solution. And here you can see that you first define the name and the ID of the solution. You define whether you want to import identity data, like an HR system, or whether you want to import user groups or provision access down there. Once this is done, you define the connectivity details, and depending on the connector, you have different options on connecting. The queries and mappings are predefined, and this is where the difference in the configuration of the target systems comes in. So you have a predefined communication protocol like REST, OData, or SCIM, and inside this you define the mappings to find the right web services that give you the right information. And in these mappings we are going to import or to define those attributes in the target systems that are related to accounts or related to groups or roles that we want to import into Omada identity. Once this is done, you define an owner so that he can be notified in case of an exception and take over responsibility for the target system inside Omada identity, such as defining some kind of resource types, which might define whether you are allowed to delegate the access to the system. That might define what happens if you lose the access to a system, whether we should immediately delete your account or lock it first before we take any other action. And then of course it comes to the importing. The import is done quite easily because we have done the mapping before. You can define some general sets like how many errors will we tolerate while we import. You can define some thresholds like which is the percentage of accounts or objects that we import, and from which percentage onwards shall we stop and treat this as an exception so that we avoid to import too many false records. And then of course you have the account rules where you define how we do the mapping of the account to the identity and the personal record. There you have two different rules. The first is the ownership rule and the second is the classification rule. So the first says which person belongs this account to, and the second, what kind of an account is it? Is it a personal account? Is it an administration account? In this case, we have used a configuration of an account rule which gives us a 35% matching rate. We can manually start the import of the system from here, but typically you will do that timer-based periodically so that you always get the latest information. With all the information imported into Omada identity, the next step is to configure provisioning. For the provisioning, it's quite the same as the importing. So you have some general settings, some how do we treat errors, some thresholds in the export as well. You define the data model and the connector settings with a user that is allowed to provision or automate the creation of user accounts in the target systems, and then you're going to do the task mapping to define how do we come from an identity to an account object. And there you can do a configuration of various things. So for example, you have the option to send a constant down, to map from the identity to the account object, or even to do an expression, an easy expression as an example, to set the username just in case of a creation, but when we do an update or a disablement of the account or deletion, then we will not change the account name. These elements are configurable and inside the product standard. So you do not need to use customization to implement your task mappings. Once this is done, you can commit your settings and start the provisioning into the target systems. A connectivity configuration has 4 core requirements: a method of authentication, a communication protocol, a direction of the synchronization, whether we want to import or automate, and then the attribute mappings for the import from the target system or authoritative source or target system, and for the provisioning into. So make sure when you select your identity governance solution that it allows you to do the configuration and by that staying inside the product standard instead of extending that with customization. By that, you're going to have an easy upgrade path in case of a new version of the solution is released. Another important aspect of identity governance solution is the creation of external contractors. Most HR solutions just provide internal employee information and they do not take track of the valid contractors that are working for you. So in many scenarios, it's required to have a self-service that allows you to onboard a contractor. In Omada Identity, we have pre-built this workflow for you so that you can leverage that in your target systems or in your environments from the very first day. When you want to onboard a contractor, you're setting your first name and a last name, like Leah Waller, and she's account manager in our department. Now Robot Wolf as a manager can select the departments he is the manager of. And he can define a first and a last working day. When he submits the request, we're going to make a duplicate check to verify whether this person has already worked for our organization. But in this case, we have not found a matching contractor, so we want to create a new object instead of reactivating somebody else, or instead of taking over the responsibility of a contractor that works for another organizational unit already. Robot Wolf can now go into the list of his identities and see that Leah Waller is already part of the list of his managed identities. Looking at Leah Waller just a few seconds later will show us that she immediately has received an Active Directory account with the related attributes that are specific for the Active Directory account, as we have just defined that in the system. And she got some assignment to the Azure Active Directory and to the global directory with the contractors user group assignment. Looking for Leah Waller, we can see that this account has been created just recently. And that we have done some attributes mapping and that she's not member of anything else than the domain users. So this is how fast Omada Identity is to provision access of your managed identities in the target systems. Workflows like onboarding contractor are predefined in Omada Identity and documented in the Identity Process Plus framework. This framework gives you an overview about the typical processes that are defined in most organizations across the globe when it comes to identity lifecycle management, but as well around access management, request access, and approval. Based on these building blocks, you can do an enterprise-ready identity governance solution with only configuration and no need for customization. This gives you the best value and a head start towards your competition. With the deeper integration of identity governance solutions into modern cybersecurity strategies across many industries and a fast time to value, technologies like Omada Identity have become more relevant for a broader range of organizations that now can benefit from strong out-of-the-box functionality paired with enterprise-ready configuration options that allow the flexible integration of individual demands within the product standard. Delivered as a cloud service or on-premise, Omada Identity will empower your organization to enforce the need-to-know principle, remove access fast and reliably in case of a security breach, and to simplify the automation of user management. Make your IGA project a reliable success and do more with identity with Omada.